Hello and welcome. I was very happy to read an email this morning and hear that someone who'd been nursing their dying dog against recommendations and advice of the vet, and I'm not criticising the particular vet, I don't have the full circumstances or anything like that, but to, let's say, put the poor dog out of its misery, kill it in other words. They didn't. They've nursed it for some weeks, days. It's been very difficult. And I've been thinking of this family. The dog has fully recovered. It was not cancer, it was an obstruction which has moved itself and it's up and about, albeit elderly and will die, as will we all. It wasn't necessary to take any action other than simply be with the animal in its moments of suffering and help it through that with love and kindness, compassion, and now joy. And this is one very good reason for allowing nature to take its own course. So that's some good news. And in the next comment here, it's going to probably lead me on to a theme of right speech, as we see in the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right intention, right speech is right up there, isn't it? It's the first or the second, let's say, after right intention of the Sila Noble Eightfold Path steps, followed of course by right action, right livelihood, effort, mindfulness and meditation. And someone is asking here about right mindfulness and right speech put together, really. How can you, or it says, could I do a video on mindfulness or mindful speech? Tips on how to catch ourselves before we blurt out garbage. Well, we all do that, don't we? From time to time. I'm sure me especially. Right speech, the third point on the Noble Eightfold Path, is, in my experience, probably most people's, one of the very hardest, if we really look at it, to keep a check on. So often we say something, open our mouths, before we've engaged the thinking process. It's a real indicator and test of our equanimity, upekkha, that wonderful quality we're all striving to develop towards enlightenment, in fact, being one of those factors. But without that equanimity so firmly in place, it's so easy to speak reactionarily. In the 5 precepts, the 4th precept is to refrain from lying, is simply just that, and can be kept simple. We do not speak anything that is not true. But it is a huge expansion on that by way of no harmful speech, divisive speech, speech behind others' back, so to speak, so gossiping kind of speech, aggressive speech, and any other negative form of speech that is encompassed within the point on the path of right speech. Being that we do need to try and engage our mind before speaking out of turn or blurting out the garbage, as you point out. So there's 5 points we look at in this. There is a video going back a year or so, I was in Thailand anyway, that I looked up for someone else. I think it has in the title Sampa Palapa. So if you can spell that Pali word Sampa Palapa, it covers how we should refrain from useless speech. And this comes into the 5 points. So the 5 points for right speech, to make it easy for us to engage some thought before speaking, are that, firstly, what we're about to say, whether it's complimentary or critical, it doesn't matter, is timely. So we're saying it in the right time and right place. And we all know we can sometimes blurt something out and then realise that later on in hindsight, that wasn't the best time to approach that person. And certainly the circumstances were not conducive to that comment being received well. I could have been more timely, more mindful as to when I was to say, speak to this person about this subject, brought it up. So timely is very important. And really this is something we should always consider. So we often as trainee monks are admonished, and our teachers hopefully refrain from admonishing us very first thing in the morning before we've eaten, as we're very hungry and haven't eaten for 24 hours and therefore would not receive such admonishment so well. So often after you finish the meal, you might be called before some senior monks and you know, this is that timely point of the day when it is appropriate to be admonished. So you always know by that timing that you're going to get you're in trouble for something. Maybe you've been drinking soy milk in the afternoon, which is one of my little things I thought was okay at a Thai monastery, and is not. It's considered food just like ordinary milk. So, albeit I thought it was bean and allowable and a medicine, and technically arguably it is, in this particular monastery it was not, so forbade, and therefore I was breaching one of their their bylaws at least, if not a precept. So I was admonished, but appropriately after I'd finished the meal, when I was able to say, that's okay, I won't do it in future, make a determination, and that's the end of it. Now if I'd been approached whilst I was really hungry, I was probably dreaming of getting more of milk on my arms around for this afternoon and looking forward to it, I perhaps would have reacted less amenably to this idea of refraining from milk, soy milk even in the afternoon. And therefore it wouldn't have been timely. So timely is very important. We pick our time. Truthfully is next. Whatever we're talking to someone about, whatever it has to be, must be from criticism about something someone's done, must be truthful. This is something to be thought about. Know that the source of the information, if you weren't first-hand, if it was hearsay, is 100% correct. If it's not, or indeed if you're just talking generally, then you're not exaggerating, you're not embellishing, you're not making things a little bit better than they were or worse than they were when describing something. Truthfully is very important. And the way we speak, the way we tone, our tone of our voice, our speech should be kindly. So timely, truthfully, kindly, and then the fourth is usefully. We should speak of subjects and matters that are useful. Unless we're just warming up the situation, greeting some new guests. But if we're in a familiar environment with familiar people and familiar faces, there's no need to fill empty spaces with sampapalapa, useless speech. We can just remain silent, observing noble silence. But if we do have something to say, before we say it, we make sure it's useful. And finally, that it comes from a place of experience, experientially. So we are not preaching, we are I've forgotten the phrase, practicing what we preach. That's the phrase I was searching for there. We are not saying that people shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that when we are doing this and doing that, or we should not be saying people should be doing something and we are particularly averse to a not doing something. It should always come from a place of experience. We should only preach what we're practicing, so to speak. So this is how we prevent mindless garbage coming out of our mouths with samasati, right mindfulness of speech, right speech, which is timely, truthful, kind, useful, and from a place of experience. Think of those 5 points before you speak, whilst always observing, where possible, noble silence. It doesn't mean you refrain from speaking when necessary. When necessary, answer accordingly. When we don't know, we say we don't know. When it's yes, no, it's no. I don't know, it's I don't know. If you're not sure, or okay. These are very good, useful words that are definite in their reply. Even by the vagary of I don't know, it puts the ball back in someone's court, rather than waffling sometimes when you don't know to try and search and find for the answer whilst you're filling the gap with useless speech. So with these 5 points in mind, you should never find yourself doing that. But it is difficult, and it requires the utmost of dedication to the practice of mindfulness in all of your acts of body, speech and mind throughout all of your daily activities. Now, I don't mind repeating that question again, as it might have been frequently asked, because we must continually remind ourselves verbally of this, speaking to ourselves verbally of this, to enable us to practice it and bring it into all of our actions. Could you speak briefly on dependent origination again? Well, briefly on dependent origination again, probably not, because it's 12 points in itself. Even if I run through the Noble Eightfold Path, it takes a little while, 8 points. But the brief version of dependent origination, never forget, because the 12 points of dependent origination, which are very summarily and clearly set out in the Paccittiya Samuppada Sutta in your chanting book. I think it is page 139. 136, I did write that down. Page 136 of the Wat Marp Jan chanting book is the Paccittiya Samuppada Sutta, which is the 12 links of dependent origination, which are an expansion upon the Four Noble Truths. Mainly that there's suffering, but there's a cause of suffering. So it's really an expansion on the second point. How we take a desire, react upon it, and fuel further suffering. So really it's an in-depth look at the cause of suffering, but an expansion upon the Four Noble Truths. So to speak of the 12 links of dependent origination, Paccittiya Samuppada, briefly, I would say the Four Noble Truths. There's suffering, a cause of suffering. There is an end of suffering, and that is the path leading to the end of suffering. Other than that, to keep it brief, refer to the chant in the chanting book and go through the links. You don't have to be chanting it beautifully. It's quite difficult to chant beautifully. Read it to yourself in your own language. Understand how it is that craving leads to birth and birth leads to craving, which is summing it up, really. Rechanting, that's just coincidental. What is the purpose of chanting before meditation? Is it necessary to understand the Pali chants? I think it's important to understand the Pali chants if you're using them for such purposes as I've just explained. The Paccittiya Samuppada Sutta as a chant may sound beautiful in the Pali language and really give you a nice calm feeling and help to relax and ease the mind, the busy day's thinking brain, into a calmer state ready for meditation. But we can also use chanting, and it's important to do so, I think, as a way of reflection on the teachings of the Buddha, as in that example. And when we're chanting Itipiso, for example, the qualities of the Buddha, then the qualities of the Dharma and the qualities of the Sangha, our teacher, the teachings, and the body of monks, the lineage of monks, showing us by their example those teachings put into practice. Reflecting on that, reflecting on impermanence, reflecting on all of these things. Sharing blessings through chanting is also a way of expressing our common desire, our common wish that all beings be happy and be well and enjoy life as we're enjoying it, sharing our enjoyment with others. Actually, not hypothetically, but sharing that wish in a verbal way. Now, the point of it being in the Pali language is that it sounds nice. It can, it's been structured a long time ago in chanting books in orders such that work well in an organised chanting format. You can alter its length, you can reduce it, extend it. And it's a peaceful approach towards your meditation, your activity and meditation, and break from your daily activities. But it isn't 100% necessary. So what is the purpose of it is that's partly it. It's rather nice to do. And it's a useful way of reflecting, and it's a useful way of calming the mind, and in turn also the body as it sits and relaxes and becomes mindful, practicing mindfulness on, if you're meditating, if you're chanting with others, harmonizing with others, following the lead chanter, and following their lead in order to stay in harmony, in the same pace, in the same tone with the chant, and being mindful of the words as they're coming out. It's an activity of mindfulness in itself. And yes, it's not 100% necessary to understand, but to some extent, whilst you are chanting, you can be also following the translation in your own language, or prior to chanting you can do that, and having a rough idea of the nature, not necessarily each and every word, but the nature of what it is you are chanting about. It makes for a far more valid reason for chanting, and it makes the content that more meaningful. During meditation, when a sensation arises, do I look the sensation or ignore it and follow the breath? Yes, you'll notice a sensation, a physical sensation or a mental emotion. Those will come, they will go. Notice them. That's unavoidable unless you're in deep jhana, secluded from physical feelings and mental thought. But ordinarily, when meditating, as these things come and go, yes, just notice them and return to observing the breath, ignoring them where it's possible to do so. Obviously, if the fire alarm's going off and you need to vacate the building, get up and vacate the building. If a train or a bus is heading in your direction, get off of the track and move out of the road. But other than that, you continue with observing the breath, mindfulness of the breath. The minute you've lost mindfulness of the breath, you've stopped anapanasati, that is mindfulness of the breath, and you have to begin again. So it doesn't matter if you've been sitting watching the breath for 10 minutes, then you think about the sensation you're experiencing, you then have to start again watching the breath. When you get to 10 minutes, this may happen again. Eventually the time will become greater, longer and longer, and you'll be meditating, observing the breath for longer and longer until you absorb into samadhi and into jhanas. But if you start thinking about these sensations, then you'll just be thinking about the sensations. Now, what is liberated, and from what it is it imprisoned? What is liberated, and from what is it imprisoned? During our practice, we're trying to cut the fetters, that is the ties to samsara, rebirth. They're included in the Paccittiya Samuppada Sutta, the 12 links of dependent origination. In summary form, the ties of sensual desire, in the ties of aversion, not liking things. This wanting and not wanting, seeing this for what it is, rather than needing and things we have to have, such as food, air, relative security and comfort, protection. When we see clearly through our practice, through our meditation and developing wisdom, the nature of existence, we are liberated to some extent from suffering. When I say freedom, freedom from ignorance, which is the actual first point or last point, depending on how you look at it, of those 12 links of dependent origination. Being that ultimately ignorance leads to desire, leading to rebirth. So when we are free from avijja, ignorance, we are seeing clearly the nature of all things being impermanent, suffering and out of our control, and therefore less attached to them. And by being less attached, we can eventually let go, become detached from certain desires, cravings, thirsts that are insatiable, and just concentrate on satisfying what it is that the body needs to exist, and being content with that. This in itself is a feeling of liberation, a sense of freedom, not a literal prison. So you can have this in a prison. You could be in a prison cell and be liberated from the desire to escape that prison cell. This is freedom. And we're going to come to more discussion on this topic of freedom in one of the comments coming up shortly. So I won't go into more detail there, but with reference to that, I'll get to it again in a moment. Actually, I think I should... No, we'll just have to take the comments as in order, otherwise I'm a simple old monk, I'll get very confused. It says here, 30 to 40 people giving food sounds like a lot. Do people realise this and put a little bit in, or do they put as much as they feel like? Well, people want to give because they're giving to support the Sangha, and in the case of to a monk on a Pindapata, to feed that monk for a day. So they'll invariably give a whole meal. And of course, if 30 to 40 people do that, that's an abundance of food, which I've spoken of previously, and yes, gets shared amongst other people who need it. But yes, it's up to the people. Some people come to realise after seeing your face day in, day out for 2 years, that they only need to put a little bit in. But most don't. Most want to put in a whole meal, so you get a lot of whole meals. And this is the nature of generosity. It's to give, not to be too concerned as to what's going to be done with it after you've given. Generosity should be the action. The quality we develop of dana is in giving in itself. There is no knowing what might be the result of that giving. Obviously, one can use some wisdom. You don't necessarily perhaps give an alcoholic or a drug addict whom is begging. Possibly it's wiser to give them food rather than money, which might be used unwisely to feed a habit. In which case you do have some concern, use some wisdom as to what will be done with that food. But you don't start proliferating and think, well, okay, maybe they'll sell that food to get money to buy drugs. No, you're giving because you want to help this individual. If you don't have food, you can still give them money in the hopes that they will buy food with that, because often hunger will outweigh any other desire, hopefully. But, it's not yours to judge. You're giving for the real sheer pleasure of giving, exercising and benefiting from developing the quality of generosity. I think that the misunderstanding is that dukkha and tanha are somehow separate. I'm not sure what that refers to. Well, they're not entirely separate, no, because they're linked, but they are separate words. In Pali, when you have a word, it generally means a completely different thing. So dukkha is suffering, tanha is thirst and craving, and it's thirst and craving that causes suffering. If you don't see thirst and craving as wanting something you don't necessarily need. If you're thirsty and you want Coca-Cola but drink water, you'll soon see that your thirst is quenched sufficiently with water and you no longer have the desire for Coca-Cola, thus becoming wise to that little bit of tanha, craving, thirst, suffering, that's causing dukkha, the suffering. So they're linked inextricably to some extent. I think the misunderstanding, that's the same thing, same question. Is the food good at your wat? Well, a wat is a Thai name for a temple or monastery. I don't live in a wat or a monastery or in Thailand. But the food is certainly good enough that I receive each and every day, but it's not in my monastery, it's in my vihara here. I bring back from alms around the food to eat here. So there are no cooks, no people. So if you're thinking this is a place you can come to stay just because it has good nosh, go to my monastery in Bangalore where the food is excellent, wonderful. I dream of it sometimes if I'm hungry. Go and stay there and meditate for a few days or weeks or months or years, or ordain and become a monk, and you'll be extremely well fed. I think probably throughout all of their branches, and in India you'll get very good food because they have kitchens and lay people in there cooking and preparing the food, rather than the monks being really able there to go out on alms round. So yes, the food's good there and the food is good here, but I go and get it on Pindapata each and every day. How to lose weight? Question mark. So you're not really asking the right person. I'm not a dietitian, so I can only say eat less and exercise more. And by exercise, I mean just be active. You don't have to go to the gym. You don't have to go jogging. Walk up and down on a meditation path, practicing walking meditation. Don't laze around on luxury, high, comfortable furniture all day. Sit on a stool or sit on the floor, so you have to get up, literally, rather than slide off whenever you need to do something. Just be more active, but eat less. It's perhaps naive of me to think that that's the way to lose weight, but I would suggest it will work for most people. But seek medical advice where necessary to do so, I should say. No self, reincarnation, can't wait to see the proof. Well, rebirth, the proof is here, you're here, you have been reborn. No self, well, what will die as a result of that rebirth? What you consider to be yourself, physical body and the thinking brain. It's going to go, it will decay. The physical body will decay, the thinking brain will become less able to think, lose its memory, all the intellectual knowledge you've gained will be gone. You won't be able to think and remember things as well in your 90s as you are in your 30s or 40s or 50s. Well, I'm in my 50s and I can't remember anything. So, it's a natural progression of life. Do you think that's a self? It's not a question, is it? It's not. It's just a physical mass. It's these 5 khandhas that I've spoken of so many times. So I won't go into it in detail here. And I'm not sure, I think you're talking there with regards to another comment. So this is the danger when we get into this thread of comments. So someone recently has been writing lots of wrote a comment and then a comment to their comment to their comment after I replied. Well, I don't see those, and they accuse me of ignoring them or deleting them or not showing them. Well, I have no control over that, and I don't restrict any comments or delete any comments. I just don't go into the threads, because then you get into sampa palapa debate and conversations, and these particular comments were so long, I'm not going to get into reading such lengthy points of view that may be useful in another forum of a different nature, but in the context of this environment were not useful. So I didn't see them, so they would have gone. But sometimes that happens. So I don't really understand the not listening to music issue. So that's one of the 8th precepts. It's refrain from entertainment, the 7th precept, and beautification and dressing up, perfumes and this and that and the other. But it's mainly we refer to refraining from entertainment, listening to music or watching movies these days. If you're not seeking to become a monastic, ordain. Same with acceptable amounts of entertainment. That stuff is perfectly fine if done with mindful attitudes and understanding. This can be done while minding the precepts for lay people. Yes, you're absolutely right. And for lay people, you don't have to keep 8 precepts, only 5. And only if you're living in a monastery where it will be distracting, if anything else, for other people if you were listening to music. Even with earpods or something like this, you might not have your mind on the nature of why you're in the place to practice meditation, to really see our desire for distraction, such as listening to music or entertainment, see it clearly and work on reducing that desire so that we can live free from that need to have external distraction to be satisfied. But in ordinary and everyday life, you can listen to music, you can have entertainment. There is nothing to restrict you from doing that. So you answer your question correctly yourself. And in the beginning, you say if you're not seeking to become a monastic or ordain, the only time I've mentioned it's useful to do this practice is perhaps once a month, twice a month or once a week. You might take the opportunity on a Sunday, for instance, maybe when you're not working and you have time, to keep 8 precepts, not eat in the afternoon, and refrain from using your smartphone, listening to music or watching entertainment, just so as you can concentrate on your practice. But if that doesn't suit you, there's no necessity. But in order to really develop your practice well, it is necessary for us eventually not necessary to ordain, but we will, through our practice, become less interested in such distraction, less interested in entertainment, whether it be videos or movies or whether it be listening to music. We start to see how the repetitive nature of trying to find the next good tune to listen to becomes very boring and tiresome and ties you, is a fetter of desire, tying you to this suffering, bringing about this suffering. Have you ever been in that situation? Or what piece of music should I put on next? Have you been in that situation? Most people have. Now, I know we have an abundance of music perhaps these days at hand, but in the olden days when we were looking through records, we'd sit there for hours, oh, what to put on next, what to put on next. Either you love them all, or you've just heard that one so many times. This is a process of thinking and deciding and choosing when you can simply let it be and not have that concern and just enjoy the quiet of no music. Oh, I better change the loopy tape now because the background music's going to go and the whole party will die. It probably would, because it's a party. But if it's not a party, it isn't necessary. The music's finished, and like you say, mindfully listening to music will do no harm. It might be useful and conducive to bringing about peaceful states of mind also. And in the early stages of practice, yes, very much so, a part of practice in that sense. But it isn't, ultimately, it is something you will become disenchanted with, a distraction, and you will not want it so much. But let that happen naturally through the practice and the process of developing this disenchantment in nibbida, we call it in Pali, in and through your meditation. So I'm going to go back to the this freedom topic, because there seem to be a lot more questions than I was expecting between those two. I should have put them together. But back to that freedom, I want to read this comment as it's written, as we're talking about right speech. And I would suggest in writing there are different ways you can put things, but I won't comment on the way this is written, but the way I feel it's said. Anyone telling you that he is free in this realm is a joking fool, a liar, a con man. If we are bound to this realm, we will never be free. If we don't instantaneously have the ability to do anything or form anything, etc., ad infinitum, then we really aren't free and never will be. So I won't take that personally, because who said that? Who said we can be free in this realm? We are practicing towards freedom from suffering in this lifetime, freedom from suffering. Whilst rebirth into any realm as a result of having not cut the fetters completely, we are not free. Freedom, liberation, is ultimately parinibbana, no further rebirth, having cut the fetters of greed, hatred and delusion by the root. In other words, attain to arahantship. Even as an arahant, a fully enlightened being, one will still suffer from the body and is not free of that not attachment, but that connection with the physical body and the thinking brain, until the thinking brain and physical body dies, in which case the chitta, mind, can be liberated in order to attain to parinibbana, final nibbana of no further rebirth. Only that is freedom, and that is all I have spoken of, all the Buddha speaks of, our ultimate goal. Of course, then, what you go on to say in many comments in the threads afterwards, which I don't have here because I don't have a facility by which I can see them all at once here. I'm not sure that you quite fully understood, unless you maybe just saw a short video or read the title. No one here is suggesting anything about there being freedom, but there is a certain degree, and freedom can be seen in degrees of liberation and freedom. in that, like I said, in a prison cell even, one can be free from the desire to escape that prison cell. If you can go inside and see the true peace and tranquility there is to be had in jhana, in deeply absorbed states of meditation, free from feelings of the physical body, free from the thinking mind, free from the hindrances, secluded from the hindrances towards attaining to that state of deep absorbed meditation. That is a kind and a degree of freedom, albeit yes, no, of course, not full freedom in itself, other than by comparison to that someone whom is running up and down the prison cell, banging their head against the wall in the hopeless attempt to break out, just causing themselves injury. Using that as an illustration is what we're really getting at here. There are degrees of freedom that we can attain to and see through the progression of the practice towards enlightenment, through the stages of enlightenment: Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami, Arahant, stream entry, once returner, non-returner, and fully enlightened beings whom have fully eradicated greed, hatred and delusion through the understanding of those, eradicated ignorance that is the cause of rebirth. Again, this all links back to those 12 links of dependent origination and can be seen in its broadened and expanded upon depiction, but really is summed up in the Four Noble Truths. So this is what we're talking about in the noble practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. So probably my fault for maybe not making something clear, and I'm not criticizing the way you've worded it, but then later on you go on to, when I explain that, I can't remember what my reply was. I said I would talk about it in this next coming video, which I'm doing now. You said, but there I'm going to then, you assumed I'm going to try and explain myself away. I'm not. I'm agreeing with you. Exactly what you say. There is no freedom whilst we're attached to this physical form and this thinking brain. Some of us, however, are very much more attached to this physical body and this thinking brain. So the physical bodybuilding athletic kind that goes to the gym and admires their appearance and puts photographs of themselves everywhere for others to admire, or the intellectual who gets many, many qualifications and just cannot stop getting PhDs, are both working on the thinking brain or the physical body and not seeing the truth that those will just simply die, decay and be gone and use functionality such as the brain. Whereas if you develop wisdom of the nature of seeing how impermanent those things are and that they're the cause of suffering, you can see that they're not what you are, they're not self. Therefore, recognizing through wisdom the fundamental characteristics of existence there, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So this is what we're referring to when we're saying freedom, liberation. And in the chant, the Metta Bhavana chant, we're chanting, may all people be free from suffering, free from anxiety, free from harm, all of these things. We're wishing for others, along with ourselves, to experience freedom from, not ultimate freedom. That is the goal. Ultimate freedom, liberation from rebirth through the practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. This is what we are all looking to attain to. And skipping right ahead again to another comment which is probably there, I'm thinking about on my mind. I can't find it. I should have just kept going in order. Here, this one. I'm covering these because I know they've got lots of threads, and whilst those threads, although I only glance at them, are still in the memory, I'm getting them out of the way because by the next time I talk I will have forgotten those threads entirely, and they're gone. They've gone into the past history. I don't know where they go. I'm sure if I was to look them up I could find them, but I'm not interested in social media, in discussion groups, anything that's going on in this forum other than to receive your comments, which I'm so grateful to receive, and reply to them directly, or emails, which I reply to personally and directly. But conversations within the comments section of this this what do you call this, platform for you. You can perhaps argue with each other, but not for me to spend any time on. It isn't useful. So here we go. You know that when you seek, that what you seek has nothing to do with wearing robes, shaving your head off, or any kind of ritual practice or script, right? And then you go on to say that, can genuine renunciation or asceticism be imposed by rules from without as a pre-planned lifestyle, or does it come from within and is never a conscious decision that follows others? And then you go on to say, conforming to the life of wearing a uniform is conditioning yourself through repetitive chants and scripts, shaving your head off, belonging to a group, or is that not simplicity, or just exchanging a worldly self for a self-denial self? So, in terms of the options open to us for the practice, we can practice in lay life or monastic life, and in lay life there is very few by way of restrictions, just to keep the 5 precepts. As a monastic, yes, we need to abide by a number of regulations, 227 precepts, but a guidebook of the Vinaya Pitaka of thousands of rules and regulations, but they're guidelines towards assisting and supporting our practice, and the precepts, the 227, are more of a renunciant nature that support the keeping of the 5 precepts. Now, I found myself, before knowing anything about Buddhism, practicing renunciation, practicing meditation, and then fell into Buddhism, recognizing that a lot of the teachings of the Buddha and that Vinaya and those precepts were very much what I was doing already. Now, as far as conforming and a uniform is concerned, one, as living nomadically and pre-Buddhism, in my case, before I was practicing Buddhism or knew anything about Buddhism, living outside in some places, but in the UK in a van and living without a house, without a shower, with just wet wipes and a bucket to go to the toilet in. So homeless existence. I found a very practical way of keeping my hair was to have it shave it off completely. I had long hair at first and I shaved it off completely for no other reason than I didn't want to go around smelling with greasy hair, with nits and fleas, because I had very few opportunities to wash, let alone shower or bathe or wash my hair. And it was a practical solution, as true as it is today, and what the Buddha found then, set out to shave off all the heads of the people joining his Sangha in order to make life so much more simple. It is not a uniform, particularly. Surely isn't it the case that tidying, combing, brushing, doing anything to your hair is by way of conforming to society's ideals? If you were to go to work, I don't know where you're from or where this is coming from, this comment or these comments, but if you were to go to work wrapped in your bedsheet with a shaven head, would your boss greet you ordinarily and say, "Oh, fine, okay, good, how are you?" Or would he say something? Perhaps you're wearing the uniform of what's necessary within your culture. Now actually, even though personally I'm in a Buddhist country, around many thousands of Buddhist monks, I'm not wearing their uniform. I'm a completely different coloured, in my robes a different colour because they came from a different country. It's the only reason they were offered to me. We don't get our own robes, we have what's offered to us. And I actually practice differently also, still in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path, but with less of the devotional practice and rites and rituals that you refer to here. In fact, none of those go on here. I'm living much the same as I was 15 years ago in my van. In the UK. Getting up, maybe reflecting for a while, practicing meditation, having one meal, and then just meditating or then thinking, contemplating for the rest of the day. Avoiding much interaction with the outside world other than what was necessary just to keep a bare minimum income going to live at that time. But as a monastic, I haven't changed much. Now, I was neither then conforming to societal norms, and I am now certainly not conforming to the majority of societal norms, albeit if you watch just videos of Buddhist monks, one might see that as the norm. But if you look at me alone, or you alone, standing in any particular society, who stands out? Who's wearing the uniform? If I go home to my mother's village and visit her, I'll be dressed like this, with this shaven head. Will I look normal? Let alone will I be wearing a uniform? No. And even here, am I? No, I attract attention here. People come to speak to me. Oh, I'm a different coloured monk. I'm wearing different coloured robes. I have a different coloured face. Where am I from? They're interested and they want to understand my practice. How is it different from their own monks, their own sanghas here in this country? There's always going to be in a community, out of necessity and practicality, a sense of uniformity. And we conform to uniformity by way of keeping to certain different bylaws of an organisation. For instance, Core Wat, which is the additional rules of monasteries in Thailand. These are Thai expressions. In addition to our normal precepts, such as, for instance, I couldn't drink my soya milk in the afternoon. Perfectly acceptable, because if everybody was to start that, it would alter the feel, the nature, and the overall general intent to not eat anything at all in the afternoon, other than the real bare necessity medicines in that particular forest monastery that I was practicing in and staying in at the time. So these you join voluntarily, but can always walk away. There is no conscription, there is no forcing, other than to keep the precepts as an ordained bhikkhu, which are guidelines in their majority towards supporting the core precepts. And these are not seen by monks, generally speaking, bhikkhus, generally speaking, or bhikkhunis, nuns, as rules, but as the supportive structure for keeping those precepts. So, in answer to your question, you know that what you seek has nothing to do with wearing robes, blah, 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 blah. I'm not seeking anything. I'm experiencing the teachings of the Buddha through practicing what he taught. And he gave us the opportunity to practice that in lay life, which I have done, or in monastic life, which I am now doing. And this is not seeking anything, but practicing towards an end goal of liberation, enlightenment, becoming free from suffering in this lifetime, and no further rebirth, no future rebirth. This is not something we seek externally or through intellectual knowledge, but something that will come to be seen that we already have. We are already experiencing. We have already experienced rebirth. We are now able to use this good opportunity we have of rebirth in the human realm and being able to listen to Dharma, to put that into practice and be free from rebirth in the future. Now, if we take the monastic form, and that is all it is, a form, and it doesn't matter what colour your robes are, or how many other monks you are living with, or you're not living with, you are still adapting to a renunciant life. You give up all use of what you had to use in the world, mainly money and the ability to cook and provide your own way of living by way of food, sustenance. You become dependent on lay people. Now, in order to do that, and for that to have worked for so many years, 2,568 years, unchanged are these rules that the Buddha put in place at the time over the 45 years of teaching and establishing the Sangha, in place to enable that structure to work. Now, the reason those rules haven't changed is because it does work. The way the monks behaved, carried themselves, their deportment, in the simplest of cloth and clothing, therefore clothing to be offered, one piece of material, and maybe a second as a lower robe, just the one set, simply dyed and thrown together out of old rags at first. Now a little bit more better with advances in textile industry, etc. But, you know, still very simple, a bed sheet and a half. This is the uniform. It can be hardly described as such. There's no rank within this uniform. The most senior of the Sangha Raja of Thailand, the highest, most Vasas it only goes by, number of years wearing these robes as an ordained bhikkhu, of which probably the longest living is maybe 70 vasas, 70 maybe, because you can only ordain as a bhikkhu at 20. So once you get to 100, there's a maximum of 80 vasas. Even monks, ordained Buddhist monks of high attainment of that stature, will be wearing these same robes as a newly ordained novice monk. The same robes. In fact, theirs will be the same and even older and more patched up and worn out. There's no rank or hierarchy involved. And I would say that in the workplace, generally speaking, or in society, socially speaking, even in the gym, whilst exercising, there are all kinds of uniforms. Do you go to your gym in your 1970s Adidas tracksuit and bag? Probably yes, it's probably back in fashion now, but some time ago that would be seen as, and plimsolls would be seen as quite absurd. One has trainers rather than plimsolls, but in my day at school one wore plimsolls. Do they wear plimsolls now? Possibly not, possibly they do, I don't know. I'm a little bit out of the trend of things, but look at these trends. They're uniforms, aren't they? They're to really be fashionable, is a uniform. The minute you pick your comb up in the morning, it isn't really for cleanliness or hygiene. It's to address the appearance of your hair. Monks don't have mirrors. We don't know what we look like. We have no hair to brush. We just shave it off, and we only do that. Really, the rule is that as long as it doesn't get more than 2 fingers length, and that applies to all hair above the neck. So we could have a beard this long and hair this long, eyebrows, which mine are getting that way, this long, before you can shave them, or before you do shave them. But you can shave them once a month or anything, by way of hygiene and practicality, cleanliness, ease of maintenance. And this is the only nature behind that whole sharing of things. So yes, thank you for your concern. I do know that. I do know that the practice of looking towards attaining to enlightenment is not about wearing robes and shaving one's head. In fact, there can be very many people who don't do that, who have attained to far higher levels of realization than those that do that. It can definitely be said and definitely be seen, and witnessed and experienced by yourself. So often outward appearance can allude to that when seen in a certain kind of environment. But when you look into it more deeply and see it for what it truly is, it is very bare, simplest way of living. For instance, in my van, I couldn't really get away with wearing what is ultimately a dress, because although I possibly would have got away with it, it would have attracted the wrong kind of attention. And I was trying to attract no attention and not be seen, because I was living in public places. So I had 2 pairs of jeans and 5 t-shirts, which meant that I could be washing 1 pair of jeans or cleaning 1 pair of jeans, which was a difficult process of soaking them in detergent in a bucket of water in my van, whilst I was wearing the others. And when given the opportunity to dry that said pair of jeans, hanging them over the bonnet in the sun, and a different t-shirt each day for sake of hygiene, the same principle applied. That was the bare minimum clothing I could get away with. No underwear necessary, no socks were necessary. Even in -5 degrees, I wore no socks. I just had sandals and Wellington boots and very, very cold feet if I had to walk outside the van to get water, fetch water or anything like that. But I didn't have the ability to clean or launder anything, so I had to use a very practical way of dressing. Now this would have been more practical, this outfit, in those circumstances than what I was wearing. It would have been warmer and more adaptable to different conditions, both hot and very cold, but it wasn't appropriate. Plus, I wasn't an ordained monk, so one would be disrespecting the nature of this attire by wearing such if one wasn't ordained. Only by way that it's become known that someone wearing this kind of outfit is a Buddhist monk, and therefore you might be good enough to offer them some food to eat if it's the appropriate time. And that would be wrong in the sense of someone who's going to work, for instance, as I was doing once a week, for me to be offered food by people who thought they were offering to a Buddhist monk if I wasn't a Buddhist monk. So I wore some basic jeans and a t-shirt, and very cheap jeans, very cheap t-shirts, and that was enough, the bare necessity. And I had a jumper, or a fleece, no, a jumper, which I couldn't really wash because it was wool or something of that nature and would never dry. But it was good for the night time, and a woolly hat, which I was allowed to wear because I wasn't a monk. We don't generally wear woolly hats as monks. Well, you wouldn't want to here, obviously, in 40 degrees heat. But hats, head coverings in Buddhist countries are rather a no-no thing, from the perception of the lay practitioners that are supporting us and looking after us. So you must remember, conformation is to blend into society, not necessarily to be a part of societal norm, adopting a uniform or hierarchical systems or doctrinal things. Just to be polite, considerate of others' feelings, traditions, customs and cultural influences. And that's what we do, as much as we have to do with legal things like, having correct visas in place and all of these, keeping the laws of the country that we're living in at the time. Well, in Rome, doing as the Romans. But I'm sorry you see it in any other way, whether it's all monks in general or whether it's me in particular. But I hope I've addressed all of the other bits of the thread that came along. I am denying self, yes, in the sense that I'm trying to eradicate greed, hatred and delusion, the nature behind any impression that the physical body and the thinking brain is a self, trying to have no principle or no notion of self. This is the first stage of enlightenment. And I'm pretty sure that one, through the practice, does quite quickly come to realize when you've got rid of your identity through throwing away your clothes and your hairdo. I was very pleased with my long hair. I had long, blonde hair, which I could do in ponytails or buns or dreadlocks I had once, plaiting styles, all kinds of things at different festivals. I used to enjoy my different things I could do with my hair. If I had to go to a smart sort of meeting, I could make it look smart, having it up in a little bun. It was all great fun. That was all very much a part of identity. So shaving it off and cutting it off was quite an experience of letting go of that attachment to appearance, which is what it all was. So if you think that it's a kind of idea of uniform, try shaving your head and see how you feel. Try going to work in your bedsheet and nothing else, and see how well you fit in, or don't, as the case may be. And probably in this day and age in England, no one would be allowed to say anything to you. They just, last time in 2022, I was remarkably surprised. I went from Heathrow to my son's house using public transport that someone had fortunately financed for me, which is easy to do these days for another by way of Google Pay and such like, but meant no transactions or interactions had to occur. But I did think people might say, what on earth are you? What are you doing? Why do you look like that? Because I look just like this. Not a word. Nobody batted an eyelid. I might as well have just been dressed as much. And I wasn't, it wasn't that I was expecting any kind of approach or anything, but to me this is unique to see. I was the only Buddhist monk for that entire journey, and nobody mentioned it because I could have been anything, I suppose, and it's perhaps not politically correct to say anything, which I think is a great shame, because the nature and the purpose of us looking different is that people do ask and inquire, because it's only if people inquire as to what we are doing that we can explain that we're Buddhist monks and we're practicing, and therefore share with them the Dharma from the point of view of our own experience, which we are not able to do. We're restricted from doing by way of those guidelines, not a rule, but as a suggestion, in order to not become a proselytizing, evangelical, soapbox, in-your-face religion, converting people, but to be subtle and unseen and in the background, except at the appropriate times of day, when dressed like this, we're a signpost towards something different, an alternative way of life for people to follow by way of our own example to others. And therefore people can please come up to me and say, what on earth do you look like? Are you a Hare Krishna? Are you a Buddhist monk? What sort of Buddhist monk are you? Ask those questions. They don't ask that anymore in England, it seems. But you should, because it's nothing wrong. It's not insulting. Even this comment is fine. You're asking a valid point, a question. You're checking that I don't think dressing like this leads to enlightenment. The monastic life, the keeping of extra precepts that are supportive of doing no harm, yes it does. The renunciant life, the samana life, yes it does lead more quickly, more directly towards enlightenment, because you have renounced all distractions from that path, from that activity, from that practice. But in itself, no, the form is irrelevant. I agree with you. So just because you've had the standard reply, which unfortunately it's all the time I have to do, well not all the time, but all that's necessary to do is to say that I will address the comment, and I do address all comments in these talks, is what you've received. It's not to divert from the subject, but to be covered in fully in this format. Otherwise I wouldn't have anything to talk to you about. I could talk to you about Dharma until the cows come home, literally, and enjoy doing so. But there are also many other places where you can hear Dharma like that, and probably once a week I do that also. But this is also a good time for a place to, for me, timely, but for you, whenever you wish to watch, to just go through comments which are simply addressing the practice as put into place in all of your daily activities of life, in business life, in social life, in family life, outside of monastic life, and how you can integrate the Dharma, integrate the teachings of the Buddha, integrate the practice into everyday life in that way. Coming from my own experience of doing that, but also living as a monk and interacting daily myself also with lay people, lay folk. So on that note, I hope that I've addressed all of your queries, whether they be in the threads or not, satisfactorily. I've never had to remove any comments particularly, because I'm not sure how to do that, but or not had to find out how to do that. But someone whom is particularly despondent in my lack of replying, only because I haven't got round to replying, and would have today, but now have not, because they did progress into some rather, let's say, not right speech in terms of calling me all sorts of things, which they are free to do so by way of email directly to me, and I will address any issues of any nature where it's succinctly put down, whether it be praise or blame, criticism or otherwise, very happily. That's what I'm here to do, because this is all Dharma, and it's helping develop our understanding of the use of Dharma, because after all it is a way of life. It is an educational system beyond any other. Even as historic as it is, millennia old, there is no educational system as all-encompassing and all-empowering as this one. This alone, this practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. So I do welcome any comments or complaints. There's no problem with complaints. It helps keep me focused on the right path. But when they're just a comparison of other philosophies, or criticizing or suggesting that I have no understanding of this philosophy, of Buddhism, then I can only look to address through my own practice and continued practice what it is you might be saying there. But I can't really understand it unless you have anything specifically by way of example to show me, or tell me from which point of view that you might be coming from. So I was just addressing, and I don't know that they'll necessarily continue with their... Sometimes people just get a little bit overexcited, maybe, something. But I agree with mostly what people are usually saying about things. I come from a slightly different point of view, and I'm certainly not offended by anything anyone has to say. Anyway, on that note, trying to get all of the... whilst maintaining right speech, as we started out with, trying to get all of my dirty laundry washed in public is an expression we have in English there, without upsetting anyone unduly. But I think I did have cause to remove that person's comments in the end, and I can't remember exactly why. YouTube will not do it. Well, you can make sure that YouTube don't do it automatically. You can turn that off. But of course, if people put in something, rude words and things like that, I think it will automatically hold those before you will authorize them for publication, put it that way. So on that note, I'm very happy that out of the number of subscribers here and comments that I do receive, that they're so encouraging towards not only my own practice, but all of us joining together to discuss our practice, forming a group of Kalyanamitta, friends on the path, practicing with the same goals in mind. We're all very encouraging, hopefully, towards each other and supportive of that one activity, of being kind to each other and causing no harm, either to ourselves or others. On that note, be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.